Learn more about Bailey, Katie, and the team by visiting purelandscaping.com.
All right, guys. So today we have Lauren. She is from Echo, and she's actually one of my really good friend's wives. DJ Judge. I love him. He's amazing. And him and I share a super tight bond. And his wife is into horticulture big time. And that is so cool. She works at Echo. We're going to talk a little bit about Echo and her part there and her journey and her passion in horticulture. So it'll be a really cool conversation. I'm excited to have it. So welcome, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So I just kind of want to start off by talking about Echo. For people that don't know what Echo is, where is it? What do they do? And what's their mission?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're based here in Fort Myers, right? And so I've heard people say that Echo is Southwest Florida's best kept secret. And I feel like you either know about Echo and you love Echo, or you haven't heard about it.
Right.
But Echo is really a network of farms, not just here in Southwest Florida, but also all over the globe. We have farms in Southeast Asia, in different parts of Africa, and we have networks that are really worldwide. And so that's the purpose of Echo when you think about network. So Echo exists to provide those networking and resources to specifically small-scale farmers across the globe. So here in the United States, that looks like doing trainings, and we host interns, we host tours, we host events on our demonstration farm in Southwest Florida. And the purpose of that is to demonstrate sustainable agriculture, small-scale food resourcing techniques for folks who are maybe trying to grow food better for their families or for their community. And so whether it's like nonprofits, large scale, worldwide, or it's just like a family trying to share extra produce with their neighbors, Echo has resources and training and supplies and plants and seeds, for folks. So that's what we do.
That's crazy. That's awesome. So have you been involved in, so how does that work from helping people from other countries in place? How, because I know there's different zones and different environments, so you can grow some things here, some things there. Do people come over here, or do you go over there? Or because everything can be done over video and virtually, do you guys meet virtually and teach people? So how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal for, I think, sustainable agriculture in general is for sure to be able to meet people in their context. So while Echo as a whole kind of focuses on that tropical agriculture, we're in that zone. That's what we can do. Florida's our environment is a whole lot more like South America than it is the rest of the United States. So when we're demonstrating things on the farm, it's directly applicable. We're able to grow the same plants that folks are growing in maybe these developing countries or in these contexts, where they're familiar with food that we can grow here, which is really cool and really exciting. But when it comes to that worldwide focus, our farm in Thailand is focused on supporting those people there. It has a seed bank. It has a nursery. It has those resources. They're equipping folks there. They're run by natives. So even though we're here in the U.S. and our focus is North American food security, the farms that are overseas are going to be focusing on their context and their folks.
Wow. So that's super cool. So does Echo have legit farms there, or do they partner with people, or how does that work?
It's really both, honestly, which is so cool. So we call it a small farm resource center. And so in the same way that here in Fort Myers, we have a demonstration farm, we're running research, we have a seed bank, we have a nursery, we have that replicated overseas, and it's run by folks there. And so it's kind of like a hub. I think that when we think about development or food security, we want to be able to, we don't want to hold all the knowledge and have people come to us. We want to empower the folks that are in their communities already doing it. So how can we give you a packet of seeds and you already know how to grow those things, and now you have more to grow for your neighbors? What are the ways that we can empower communities that are already there, instead of just trying to come in with our knowledge and share or whatever, have people come to us? That's not realistic. Instead, how do we participate with folks that are already in their communities, already know their community and what their community needs? And I think it's cool to think about that within the context of the United States as well, because anyone living in their neighborhood would maybe be able to identify families that they know that could use an extra bag of fresh lettuce or something like that. And so I think that Echo really promotes or embodies that idea that anyone can grow a little bit of extra food for somebody. Anyone has the capacity to help in whatever context they're in. And so here in the United States, I think about our nursery and how we focus on selling edible perennials. And those are things that you can grow anywhere is not the 40-day kale that all of a sudden you've grown it and now 40 days later you got to pull it out because it's done. But instead, what are those things that you can plant it and it's easy, it's edible. Kids walking past are able to like identify that as food, like fruit and things like that is so accessible to people. And that's nutrition. Those are vitamins. Those are minerals that we're missing in our diet a lot of the time.
Yes, huge. Oh my gosh. So my sister-in-law is huge on healthy eating and going into like, she's raising a bunch of children. And now I have a child of my own. And so like, you don't think about it as much, or I mean, at least I didn't when, just going to the fridge, getting something to eat, eating it. But when you're raising a child, it's like you start to look at everything, learn what's in the ingredients. And it's like, wow, there's a lot of horrible stuff in the US in the food that they produce. And, I have a gentleman on my team named Eric. He's super into permaculture and growing things and to eat, and it's really neat. And so my world is kind of blending with my sister-in-laws, and also getting to know you and get to know Echo better. It's like it's opening up a whole different area as far as food source that I've never really been exposed to. And like my knees, my joints, like I feel like I'm an 80-year-old man a lot of times. It's like I'm just not getting the nutrients that I need. And so a lot of the food that is just readily available and mass produced, I feel like is not that good for us. And so like when we can be able to produce that on our own, I think that's so cool. I think this world is so based off of convenience, and it drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also like I have Amazon packages at my house, like 3 times a week.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's that such convenience culture. And I feel like it's ripped food out of kind of the day-to-day family thing, just because everything's so busy. But
yeah,
I think interest is taking, like people our age and all demographics, I think too, are really starting to gravitate towards this and towards food. And so,
100%. I think that, like COVID, for example, really exposed like our supply chains and our production is not always dependable. And especially when we're thinking about folks that like live more on those margins of like, man, their budget is really tight and their margins are tight. And when something like a pandemic happens, then where is their food source coming from? And if our grocery stores are not able to be stocked even for a week, that creates a whole gap within the nutrition, especially within kids, especially within schools, especially within the elderly. So, I think that like it's cool to see how I think our age demographic, because we lived through COVID, has kind of like seen this other side of the globalization and the industrialization of food. And it's like, oh, wait, there are other ways we could live differently if we needed to.
And so something that I have, been worried about too, especially, I keep saying this, but now with the kid, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to make sure she's got food. And it's super cool. Like the age that she's at, we're like blending up like sweet potatoes and pears and avocados, and we're blending that up and feeding it to her. So it's like, even the food that we could grow here, we could eat, my little girl would be able to have food too, which is obviously more important than just me eating. So yeah, I think sustainable living is, as a whole, is really growing. Our culture continues to go more and more fast paced, like every day, every year. Like even the videos that we have to produce for marketing now are just like, they have to be short, they have to be sweet, they have to be so enticing, they have to be very interesting, or else we're not going to watch them. And so it's like, it's very crazy. It's a crazy culture. But I really think that growing food for individual families is coming back around. And I hope that does, because that would make the supply chain way more us less dependable on it, I guess.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, I never thought about it. Like I went to school, there was always food in the lunchroom. When I went home, there was always food. And I never ever would think about a supply chain issue. The first time I ever even thought about that was when COVID hit. And I was like, oh my gosh, like these are real things. Like sometimes deadlines can't be met. And that means people might be shooting each other for food. Like it can get legit. So yeah, that's crazy stuff. Enough about that. Tell me more about Echo. So, and I want to hear about, how did you get started at Echo? What's your journey in horticulture?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like you, I never really thought about food growing up. It wasn't, we didn't live out in the country even. So like farmland, like, yeah, I knew it existed, but it wasn't, like a part of my daily life. And so when I thought about plants, I really thought about it from like my mom plants flowers in the front yard in the summer. So it really wasn't until I moved to Chicago and I completed my teaching degree and I started teaching on the west side of Chicago, and I loved it. It was such a beautiful place to be, and I really just became aware of how I can be the best teacher in the world. But if my kids are coming to class and they haven't had breakfast or they don't have an adequate diet, like memorizing your math facts is not on the top of the list.
Right.
And so kind of realizing that like basic needs weren't being met where I was at. And so in that process, it was just fascinating how it also kind of like intersected with my own story of like eating disorders. And so food was just like this constant thing in my head. And so as I kind of transitioned out of college into working full time and being a teacher, just realizing that, just food security is a huge issue. And so even though Echo as an organization has historically really focused on international, like third world or developing context, small scale subsistence farmers overseas in these villages, they also do have like a community gardening track and a school garden track and urban gardening. And so I knew of Echo, and then it was really when the pandemic hit that I was kind of faced with, okay, am I going to teach over Zoom? Or I know that Echo has this internship program, so I could go down and be an intern at Echo instead of having to live in Chicago during a pandemic. So I came down right during the pandemic, and I was the community garden intern, and I just had these opportunities to not only like invite school groups to Echo and to see our gardens and to see, like when kids get to like taste and touch and smell and see colors and the different textures and like soil. And we also had vermicompost, which is the worms that are decomposing food scraps. And, these like fifth graders are just holding worms in their hands and they're like, whoa. And that just something came alive for me, I think, in just that understanding that like for kids to be excited about plants and about healthy food and about our soil and the entire ecosystems that are underneath the ground and that are allowing these plants to grow so that we have this delicious, cool food. That was just like a whole new world for me. And I loved that. And so I think that I feel like the most alive and the most excited about the future when I'm able to like go to classes and like talk to kids about healthy eating and foods and how a seed literally sprouts and grows into a new plant and you can watch that happen. So I loved that. And so that's kind of how I got exposed to Echo. And I actually finished my internship and went back up to teach in Chicago again. And long story short, now I'm back here at Echo and I'm the propagation manager. So Echo itself has a demonstration farm and we have interns that take care of that farm. So there's the community garden internship that I did and 7 other internships that folks can come and be a part of. And then we also sell plants to the public and we do trainings and events. So my job as propagation manager is to supply plants not just for the farm but also for the nursery that we can sell to the public.
Okay.
And then I also do trainings. So I'm teaching folks how to graft. I'm teaching folks about disease management, pest management, and did I say grafting stuff? And so that's what I get to do full time. Like, I can't believe I'm paid
really
to
cool.
like hang out with plants.
Oh
I
my
love my
gosh.
life.
That's so cool. So that's something what you just said there. I can't believe I'm getting paid to play with plants. Like, that's how, like, when I fell in love with the landscape industry and plants outdoors, it was when a customer asked me to do a landscape job, and I was just used to mowing grass. And so they asked me to do a landscape job, and I walked into the nursery, and it was just like a sense of peace just fell over me. Like, there was birds, there was butterflies, there was beautiful plants, there was some water. It was just like in the morning, it was beautiful, sunrise. And it was just like, I cannot believe I'm getting paid to be here. I felt like I was on my 5th grade graduation trip. And it was just like, this is cool.
100%.
And so I think, and I hope that other people can find that too, but there's something so special about being outdoors and connecting with the outdoors and plants.
Yeah, I think that is, like, you touching on that is such a particularly deep thing for someone of faith, because like when we look at scripture, like God himself went and planted a garden. Like, to do the work of the soil is to like put our hands where God was, to put our hands like where God has been and what God has created. And there's just such depth to that. Like, I could go on a whole tangent that I'm not going to do right now, but like there's such a deep story in scripture when we think about the people of the land, and that was Noah, and that was some of the kings and judges, and God just like takes special time to like highlight those things. And I think that for those of us who are working in agriculture, we have such a cool opportunity to share about that to other folks, because like in our culture there is stigma, and there is like this understanding that like, oh, working with your hands, or even like getting dirt on your clothes, or like your blue collar, or like whatever there it is, where like if you open the pages of the Bible, like God is blessing that, like every plant is like singing testimony to who God is. So like we get to be out there preaching to these plants every single day about who God is. And that like I just think that like that just overflows out of us, because we're getting to like be with Jesus every single day with every single plant that we're working with.
And you know what, just being in the garden, and we have Pure Landscaping, our big design and renovation company, and that's a lot of, hustle, make sure it's all beautiful. But the Fort Myers Garden Service, our maintenance company, it's not like hack and go like everybody else. You actually go in these customers' gardens, and you go through and you prune, and it's gentle, and you notice the little things. Like, you notice the there haven't been many butterflies around, is because there's not many blooms, or did the HOA cut off all the blooms in between my visit? Like, oh my gosh, now there's no more butterflies. But it's just like, there's so much beauty when you slow down and you work in the landscape, and you get a super cool environment to do that in over at Echo. And they are Christian based, right? Yeah. So that's super cool. So they have a great foundation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that is really, really interesting. So how does faith play into the workplace at Echo? Is it kind of a thing that's openly talked about, or what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that every person in their own experience of faith is going to just embody it differently in how they work. But I think that Echo as a whole, like, I mean, we've got it, like, if you want to look on the website, we've written it out. But I think especially with folks that are working with food security, and that's really the focus of what Echo does, trying to provide food resources in general to folks who are struggling with food security. And to be honest, a lot of those folks here if we're going to talk about Florida, a lot of those folks are farm workers themselves. I mean, I think about Immokalee down the street. Those are migrant farm workers, and that's the biggest food desert that there is here in Southwest Florida. And so I think that for me, working in agriculture doesn't make sense outside of my faith because, first off, being able to grow your own food and provide for yourself is a huge thing of dignity. And historically, folks who have had to grow their own food have not been dignified, have been looked down upon by culture. And I think that in the exact opposite way, the Lord looks at them and he says, you are doing my work. You are people of mine. I love what you're doing. I think what you're doing is worthy of respect. And so for someone to come in and tell farmers or to tell folks, what you're doing is the Lord's work and what you're doing matters, that is lifting them up from a bunch of voices that have told them that they're not worth it, that they're not worthy of respect. And I was actually talking to a farmer yesterday in Immokalee. We were able to go there, and she was saying, like, there's such a unique opportunity when you are working in agriculture, and then you're working alongside folks who are working in fields, and that is often really looked down upon. But if she's like, if you look at me and you look at him, we look the exact same, and I'll be walking down the street and I'm like, I don't want people to think that I'm working in the fields. And then she was like, whoa, I got to check myself. Like, what is that I'm believing that, like, that this is not worthy of respect? Like, I need to follow, like, see what God sees me. He sees me as worthy of respect. He sees me as dignified, and I don't have to feel ashamed of having dirt on my clothes, or whether I'm wearing a Patagonia sweatsuit or I'm wearing thrifted stuff to work out in the fields. Like, it doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. So I think that God has given us the special responsibility of stewardship of our creation, and that can look like working alongside folks who are marginalized, but it can also look like, how are we caring for creation? And what am I doing in my yard that's either helping creation or causing damage to what God has done? Let's think about, like, the ecosystems that God has created, right? We all live within this system of plants and soil and insects and pests, and they all serve these niches, right, of our system. And if we're going to be destroying one part of that ecosystem, it's going to affect the rest. And when we live on soil that has been eroded and destroyed and killed, and isn't alive, that affects us. And if we're living among dead things, we are going to feel dead ourselves. And I think that understanding that the inputs that we have, whether we live on a yard or we live on a farm, like whatever we're doing in our, around the things that grow out of the soil really matters. And that speaks to what we believe about the world. And so I think that to live Christianly in the world is to say, I am a part of a system. I am a part of what God has created in this environment, whether it be the grass, whether it be the butterflies, whether it be even those pests. Like, how can I care for them, realizing that they play a part in what God has created? I think here in Florida, like, we have the special privilege of living along the Gulf, and those algae blooms speak a lot to the way that we care for our planet, or how we care for creation. And I think that stands in judgment against us in the way that we have historically not cared about the ways that we care for the plants that we live around. So
absolutely. No, for real. Like, what you reap is what you sow. And that's
100%.
and that's so big. And all these new constructions, speaking of my house, it's like they just come in and bring in massive fill dirt, and like all the soil here is totally crap. But it's like, I purchased this house, and so now I'm responsible for it. Like, this is I'm accountable for how I take this, and so, like, taking the soil, and I don't know if this is where everybody's heads goes, but like taking the soil, like, something that really stood out to me is when you said, like, dead soil, like all this fill dirt that they put for these houses is all dead soil. Like, it's deep, crappy, just sand, basically. And so being able to take that, tilling in compost, tilling in different types of soil mixes, and really getting fertile ground first and then allowing things to grow into that, whether it's food or it could be firebush plants to help the pollinators. It could be anything.
Yeah. And you
but-
doing that is doing the work of restoration. Like you're living out the gospel by going and
Right?
restoring the
Yeah.
soil right there. That's crazy.
Right. Absolutely. I love your perspective on that. I think that's super cool. And I could definitely resonate with that. I like that. I feel like that gives me some good foundation to go off of. When I first landscaped my property, I was only thinking I'm just going to make it beautiful. And then I started talking with Eric more, and I had this gentleman, Joshua, that worked with us for a little while, and he was very passionate about permaculture as well. And between the two of them, they got me inspired to take some areas of my yard and turn them into areas that I can grow food in. Because, I want a lawn to be able to play with my kids, but hopefully kids. But there are areas where I can put food, and that's something I've kind of been inspired to do myself. One day, maybe in like 5 years or so, my goal is to have a few acres so I can have myself like a 2-acre farm where we can just self-produce all of our food.
Yeah.
And that'll take a ton of time, but what you reap is what you sow. And how cool is it to knock on your neighbor's door and say, "Hey, I brought you some mangoes. I brought you some avocado." What a gift. Oh my gosh. Y'all check this out. She brought us a gift today. She brought us a few things. So one, the avocado. Is
That's
this just like a
Brogdon variety of avocado?
Sweet.
Fun fact, there's a spectrum of avocados, some
Okay.
being more watery and some
Okay.
being more oily.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a Brogdon, and I think it's the perfect
Sweet. So
perfect sweet spot.
this would be some
Avocado.
avocado toast with a little bit of sea salt, a little squirt of
There you
lemon on there.
go.
That's how I like it. It's like
Period.
bomb. So this is super cool. It came from Echo Farms, and she brought us 3 other things. This one, you guys might know, this is a star fruit, right?
Yeah, you might also know it as carambola.
Okay.
But it is native to actually South Asian
Wow.
places. And if you have a area in your landscaping that is like maybe closer to a ditch or someplace that's like more lower elevation, they're gonna love those lower elevation places. Whereas avocado, they say like it hates wet feet. Like you want to
yes.
plant it up a little bit.
Okay.
So the
Good to know.
carambola is great for those like lower places.
That is awesome. That's very cool. That's really good because every property is so different. And that is so important because so many people are like, "Oh my gosh, I have a black thumb." It's like, no, you just need a little bit more guidance,
Yeah.
And those little tweaks is what makes or breaks. It could be a permaculture landscape or a beautiful landscape. Those are the little details that are so important. So I got 2 more. I've never heard of either of these. It kind of looks like a small potato. What is this?
That is called a sapodilla, and it grows off a tree, and it reminds me of an apricot in the way that it grows. Like it looks like that shape, but it'll get squishy when it's ripe, when it's ready to eat. And they also call it brown sugar fruit because when you scoop it out, it tastes like brown sugar. And you know how like pears can be kind of like gritty almost? It'll taste like that. So that's what reminds me of like the brown sugar, that it
Very
has a little bit
cool.
of grit there, but I think it's so delicious.
That is exciting. So is it like a dessert thing or is it like a
You
morning
know,
kiwi?
I love putting it like on my oatmeal, or
Oh,
folks
okay.
also like put it on a baked sweet potato, but
Yeah.
because it has like that sweet brown sugar vibe, also yogurt, maybe on top of yogurt, but you can also
I'm going to try that in my yogurt. That's awesome. Very cool. All right. This last one, it looks like a mini tomato, but it's not. It's yellow
yeah,
and orangish.
it's
What
in
is
the
this?
tomato family,
Okay.
Solanaceae. But it's a South American fruit. It's called naranjilla.
Can you say that again?
Naranjilla. I sound real American right now, but that's a fascinating, like it grows on a bush, but
Okay.
it's sweet. And so it kind of gives those tomato vibe, or like eggplant. You know how eggplant's kind of out there on this like
Yes.
bushy thing. So it's not like a perennial. It'll produce and then die back, especially here in Florida.
Mhm.
But it's sweet and delicious.
That's cool. So does it taste like a tomato too?
No, it's gosh, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like okay, maybe it is like a sweet tomato, sweet
sweet tomato?
creamy tomato.
Ooh, creamy. Okay. Yeah.
But tomato like gives this acidity that it doesn't have. So I don't really know
Gotcha.
what I'm
I
saying
follow
there.
you. So that's very cool. Thank you so much for those gifts. I will
course.
thoroughly enjoy those.
Yeah.
So as far as like some of your favorite fruit that you grow or vegetables, or anything else I might be missing,
Yeah.
what are some of your favorite ones that you grow that you love?
Yeah, I think that here in Southwest Florida, we have the unique privilege of being able to grow so many things.
Mhm.
I love
Ton.
tropical. I think we're just highly blessed.
Yes, for sure.
But when folks ask me this question, I always have to first say tomato because I think that eating a tomato that you have grown yourself is a singular experience in the sense that tomatoes that you buy at the grocery store are never going to taste the same.
Okay.
That's because they pick them when they're green and then they chemically ripen them. But when you're buying, that's a whole topic for another
That's crazy.
But Immokalee, Florida is actually the #1 tomato producer in the United States. So most tomatoes that are U.S. grown are going to be shipped out of Immokalee, Florida.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
They pick them green so that they can ship them to wherever, and then they can chemically ripen them. So they taste like green tomatoes. Because they just chemically ripen them to make them look red,
Gotcha.
but they still have that flavor profile of a green, unripe tomato. All that to say,
Super interesting.
so when you get to like grow your own tomatoes and you're picking them off, it's like eating candy. And I mean, you like, if you have some thriving tomato plants, you're like handing them out to your neighbors, you're bringing them to church to get rid of them. You know what I mean? Like it just like builds this community of like, ooh, eating like a ripe, fresh tomato. Nothing's like it. It's like wild.
That is awesome. I was not expecting that.
Yeah. I think that tomatoes and yeah, I got a chance to grow tomatoes for production. And so I would be in this greenhouse and it was just like these rows of tomatoes. And this was right when I was first getting interested in agriculture. And the farm manager that I was working for, he said, you know, Lauren, if you spend enough time with the same plants, they will start to speak to you. And I was like, that's ridiculous. That's really creepy and weird. I don't know what you're talking about. And then one day, my coworker had left the irrigation on. And so in this greenhouse, the tomatoes flooded because the irrigation was just running for like 12 hours. And so I get there in the morning and everything is like underwater. These plants are looking awful. There's mold. It smells so bad. And we muck everything out and we're pruning the dead leaves. We're trying to see what we can salvage. And, you know, it took like a week of just like trying to get them back to a good place. And then, you know, like a week later, I walked in and I looked at these tomatoes and there's like new growth and they're like green again in some places. And I was like, that's what it means that plants talk to you. Like I walked in there and I was like, and it was just like they were telling me like, we're going to be okay. We got it. So that was the moment where I was like, wow, these things are alive. Like I'm not just working with arts and crafts. I'm working with something that is literally communicating with the soil, is communicating with the sun, is communicating with other plants, like the hormones that are running through plants. Like that's a whole different topic. It's insane the amount of just language that we can learn to speak the more time you spend with plants.
Absolutely. That is literally so cool. One of the things you said right there was the plants communicating with each other. Some people be like, okay, shut the heck up. You guys are hippies. You guys are plant nerds. But no, I forgot what vine it is, but there's this one particular story where a customer wanted a vine moved from one tree to another. I think Bob Cook talked about this. I heard it from him. And they wrapped the vine all the way up the tree, but the vine doesn't like to be wrapped all the way in this way.
They're right-handed or left-handed.
Yes. Then so it went the other way, or it all dropped and then started to go up on its own, and the customer was so freaked out. And so it was a crazy thing.
Yeah.
But and also like they will grow towards each other or they will grow away from each other. Like there's they communicate, and it's
Mhm.
wild. Like,
Mhm. Yeah,
it's
and that
crazy.
ties into pest management as
Mm,
well because there's some plants that attract certain types
right.
of pests, and so you can use those to draw pests away from another type of plant, or
Mm,
vice versa. Like you really don't want to plant these plants next to each other because they're just not gonna, they don't like being next to each
right.
other, and there's legitimate science behind that. I mean, that's what
Hmm.
chemistry is, that's what biology is, that's what
Right.
botany is.
Yes.
And so it's not just a bunch of hippies hanging out.
Right. It's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Something that I think is really cool is I was learning a little bit about integrated pest management because I had a customer who was really into organics, didn't want all the pesticides and stuff sprayed on their property. So I did some research. I talked to Bob Cook and some other people in the industry, and I was learning all the things that I could do organically. There's some like yellow sticky tags that you can put throughout the landscape and hide, but those might catch some beneficials. So I want to be careful of that. But you can like buy, I don't know if anybody wants to do this for their kids or whatever, or for themselves if they're crazy like me, but I bought like 10,000 ladybugs on Amazon. They literally got shipped to my door. And I was living in a RV camper at the time, and my wife's like, do not open those in here. We would have to evacuate forever. But let me tell you, it's so cool. So I ordered those, and you guys are probably like, where the heck is he going with this? So the ladybugs will eat a lot of the like aphids and stuff like that, the stuff that will eat your plants. And so you have to put, I learned this after I released a whole bunch of them. You have to put different plants that the ladybugs will be attracted to, so they stay in that little ecosystem that you're creating. So I learned that the hard way. But it is so cool. Like those are called good beneficials, and those are actually brought from China, I believe, because the orchards here were getting all destroyed and eaten. So I think they brought the ladybugs in from China to eat the aphids. Maybe wrong about that, but that was one of Bob Cook's lessons that I think I retained. So, but yeah, super cool,
It's wild.
super fun stuff. How everything is an ecosystem, and I didn't pay attention too much in science class, even though I did enjoy it.
Same. I clipped out of
Right.
biology in college. Like I
Right.
was out here with no science. Like, oh, okay, I think I want to do soil science.
Yep.
That's what grad school is for.
Yeah, right. There you go. So that is super cool. I love that. So I remember talking to DJ at one time, your husband, and he was like, "Yeah, we're doing stuff here in Chicago with food, man. You'd be so proud of me." And I'm like, "What are you doing in there with food?" So tell me a little bit about, were you doing something there with food? What did that
Yeah.
look like?
So, back up in Chicago, I was teaching again.
Mhm.
And there's some really cool nonprofits in Chicago that are doing hydroponics.
Okay. Is
Um,
that like the tower, the food tower
Yeah,
thing? Is that
so
what that is?
hydroponics, and there's a couple different iterations of it. Kind of just depends like where you're at.
Mhm.
Um, when you're like so excited to talk about something you don't even know where to start.
Yes.
That's what I'm feeling right now. But okay, so hydroponics would look like being able to grow certain things like lettuce, for example,
Okay.
in cubes or in water. So they're floating in water. Normally you'll do like a styrofoam something and then plant your seed in that, and then it's just floating in this water. And so you're able to compactly grow so much more than you would if you were trying to manage like garden beds.
Mhm.
So your really only limitation then is just making sure that you have fertilizer that's water soluble, and you can just buy that very easily. And so they were able to produce like incredible amounts of greens. Celery does really well in hydroponics. And so there's incredible systems that you can look up online and use that for. So because Chicago is obviously very cold and their growing season is very short, being able to get grants to do things like that in low income areas is really awesome. I think I felt that tension of like, wow, your growing season up north is very short. And so if you have the capacity, the manpower, the funding to do indoor stuff and to get that up and running, incredible. But also I think some of that, like if we're going to talk about what does it look like to sustainably live in an area that's Yeah, I think that sometimes my thoughts lean towards, okay, well, like up north, like historically, that was really like hunter gatherer area. That was like they loved meat and you could do that like
Right.
a lot easier because that's where they lived. It was cold. They're not going to be growing stuff year round. And so when we think about our traditional American diet of like lettuce and carrots, that's a very short growing season up there. And if you're open to looking at more like native crops or indigenous food or what did folks really eat back then, and a lot of it up north is going to be meat and like for it like berries and things
Right.
that grow in those colder conditions. So it's just a completely different space than we have
Totally
down here.
different. Probably totally different zone too.
Oh, I mean 100%. Yeah, you're looking at like you can put things in the ground, like their last frost might be the beginning of May.
Wow.
So
That's
you're not
crazy.
putting things in the ground until May, and
Yeah.
then your last growing date is 31st of August. Or sorry, not August, October. The
October.
31st of
That's still
October.
not long.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, bro, I gotta be outside more than
Yes.
this.
Oh
so
my gosh.
I'm so blessed to be back down
That
here.
is funny.
Yeah.
So when you were growing food there, was it done indoors or was it done outdoors at that time? Because was hydroponics indoors or outdoors?
Yeah, so for Chicago, because like outside is just not a friendly climate, it was all indoors. So the botanical garden, Chicago Botanical Garden, had given funding to the nonprofit that I was associated with there on the west side of Chicago. And so we were able to work with them to build these systems, which are a lot of money, but they really produced a whole bunch of food. And the push there was to accept food stamps in those areas because besides that or without that, this food really wouldn't be accessible to a lot of folks who are living in that area.
And so would they be able to turn that food stamp into the government and continue funding to wow. That's really cool. Did that ever get approved or?
Oh yeah, it did.
It did?
So folks were coming and able to use their food stamps for celery, for lettuce, for tomatoes, for all of those things,
That
which
is
was just
awesome.
really cool to see.
Is that operation still going?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they're up there. You can look them up there.
cool.
Farm on Ogden.
Farm in Ogden?
Farm on Ogden.
Wow. That is really cool. So I bet that was fun to be a part of that.
Yeah, I love that. I
is
think
really cool.
yeah, I mean, I was up there teaching and there's just so much like when you're teaching, that's a whole different ministry. That's a whole different focus. And so I'm grateful to now be doing agriculture full time. But as I look to the future, it's just interesting to think or exciting to think about like what might be next.
That's so cool. So my mom is actually a teacher. She's been doing it for 30 plus years. And so is my dad. He's been doing it for like 40 years. But long story short, they have shared some of those same things, like like kids showing up hungry, like not having food in their fridge. And that's a heartbreaking thing when you're a teacher, when you're anybody, but especially when you're a teacher, because you connect with your kids, you love your kids, you take care of them. And so I can definitely, that hits home when you talk about that. It's like, man, what can I do here to be able to help those areas? But
something that
so
we
crazy
demonstrate at Echo when it comes to school gardens is here again in that tropical agriculture, we have the unique opportunity to have a year-round growing season.
Yes.
And so schools have the unique opportunity to have accessible food growing outside on their lawn year-round. So what we demonstrate is planting different fruit trees that produce fruit. Their crop season is at different parts of the year.
Yeah.
So we have like jackfruit, then we have this star fruit carambola, we have strawberry fruit tree, we have mango, we have like all of these things that are around our like schoolhouse that we demonstrate. And it's just that idea of what if kids were during recess able to go grab a star fruit?
Yeah.
What if they were before school able to just eat a mango right there? And obviously it creates or it requires maybe that systems thinking of, okay, we are going to be producing fruit. So is it going to be okay for fruit to be dropping? Like, how can we integrate the community to say we have leftovers and we don't want just them rotting around the school property? So come and grab this. But I think fundamentally you can see there's been research done to say when there is public sources of food, instead of that becoming just like food wasted, dropped on the ground and not cared for, the exact opposite happens. But there becomes this community buy-in of, oh, these are our
Yes.
trees. We're able to care for this. If there's extra, we don't want just rats coming. We don't want them just rotting. So now we're taking ownership because this matters to us. And I think that just
love
like
that.
creates this mentality of empowerment and dignity to say, like, we have control over our food supply and we can decide whether these plants are thriving or whether they're just going to go to waste.
That is so cool. I love a couple words you said, buy-in and ownership. You said some other good stuff too, but those, I love that because that's something to get somebody behind something and involved in something. Like, that's what you need. You need their buy-in. You need them to feel that ownership. And that could be so cool. Like, I am very visionary. I love to think of things and realize they're important and chase them. And I'm like, that would be so cool. Like, I would love to like just talk like, hey, what would that look like for our company to, partner with Echo and then partner with the schools, and because the schools are all busy, and just making sure that everybody's safe and they're doing their best, and you guys are doing your thing, and like our company's over here doing our thing, but it's like, if we could just take a little bit of energy and kind of put our brains together, and like, I think of an area like Fort Myers Middle School. I feel like that's in an area right there, or Colonial Elementary. My mom teaches there. Like, those are around some areas that I feel like the community would really come together and thrive on those community gardens. But that could be, it could be a whole another conversation, but it's like, I would love to, like, that right there, I feel like is doing God's work, being able to partner and really bring that stuff. I mean, you guys, you do that every single day for people all over the world, but like on a micro scale, it really touched me. I'm like, man, that could be so cool. We can make a difference doing that. But
100%. I think that what you said there of like, you've got your things that you're doing really well. I have my things. Echo has this. And then there's these schools, and we're all like functioning at the best we can. Right. But I do really think that it all it has to take is just those, I want to call them like network weavers, or the people who say, oh, wait, I know somebody, or like, oh, we have extra of this. Do you want it? Or we have some extra starfruit trees. Do you want them? Like, where can those connections happen? Because I think that in community is when growth really happens. Like, I don't have the capacity to do everything, but I can share the extra trees that I have, or the extra plants, or the extra training that I have, and like, you also have things to share, and the schools has space to share, or whatever it is. And so if we can all just like use the gifts that God has given us and have those people who say, I'm going to take the initiative, I'm going to spark this conversation. What can you do with it? That's how change happens.
Absolutely. Gosh, I love getting inspired. And like, I feel like that stuff could be so impactful for people's families. And you know what? And it would be really cool for people to be able to have that community garden, but I think it would inspire a lot of people to bring that to their backyards. And so the 8-year-old little boy that, his mom works 2 jobs, and, his dad's working 3 jobs or whatever, everybody's working their tail off. A little boy goes in his backyard and starts his own little garden to help feed his family. You know what I mean? Like, then he can play a part and do his work, and he doesn't have to starve, and he can help feed his family. Just like,
I think especially in our culture today, there's so much isolation, and there's so much like, we're all in our own bubbles, and we have everything on our phone that we need, which I think part of why I love agriculture and the thought of growing food for people is it gives me a venue to get out of my bubble. Like, I'm out here with my social anxiety, just like needing to be in my own space. But like, if I've grown extra tomatoes, like that is something I can walk up to somebody. I can walk up to my neighbor next door and say, hey, I have some extra. Do you want these? Now I've brought myself out of my bubble. I've met someone who I don't know what they're struggling with. I don't know if they know anybody. I don't know. And I think that like, that opportunity pulls back to everything we're talking about, everything you're saying of like, how can we build something? How can we create this? And like, having food to share is like, that's such an exciting way to like do that.
Like, that is what Jesus did. Like, on the Last Supper, like, he sat his disciples down, and he shared a meal with him and had a very serious conversation. But it's like a lot of scripture talks about just breaking bread and sharing food. And that is like, there's something special about that. It's intentional. And it's something that has been overlooked. It's one of those things in our society that's just been made so convenient and packaged, and you freaking hit a few buttons on your phone and somebody's going to deliver it to your door. You don't even have to go say anything to the cashier.
Yeah.
I'm not throwing shade to anybody that does that. But it's like,
but although there's so much gained from that, and we are all like so grateful for that convenience,
right,
we also need to be honest about what's lost. And I
right,
think that so many communities, even here in Florida, can teach us like the beauty with sharing a meal together. Like, again, I was in Immokalee yesterday, and we were eating these tortillas that had been made from the garden, that had made from corn that was grown, that had been handmade. They were still warm, and this
right,
salsa that again had been made. And like, there's depth there that we miss out when we're eating by ourselves in front of a TV. There's not that community. There's not that depth. And I think there is healing in food. I think we can all say that food, has healing, because
no, I hear you 100%. That is so cool. I hope that everybody's getting to kind of experience a little, because for me and you, we can see this stuff, we can taste it, we can feel it. It's so tangible because we're in it every day. People that, work at a desk or are so far removed from, what we do, it's like, it may be harder for them to kind of see it from this perspective. But I'm telling you what, the world can be changed through food and through community and talking to each other and taking care of each other. So I'm super passionate about this subject. So I want to touch on a couple things before we wrap up. So tell me a little bit about propagation, because that is one of the main things you do, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So what does that look like? How do you even do that?
Yeah, so the term propagation, we can all think of a bunch of things, but like in general, propagation is how we're going to take a plant that we want, or qualities of a plant that we want, and maintain that through, it can be as simple as saving the seeds from a plant and planting them out again into the soil.
Yeah.
Or it could be taking cuttings of a plant and planting it, or putting it in water, or putting it in soil. So there's cutting, there's division, there's seed germination. And a lot of what I do at Echo has to do with grafting. Because here in Florida, we can do a lot with fruit trees, and most trees need quite a bit of time to fruit, but you can cut down that time by grafting. Also, we have very sandy soils here.
Yes.
And so a big reason that we graft trees is because we can take rootstock, so the root base of a tree that is well adapted to Florida soil, is nematode resistant or whatever, is good for well drained sandy soils that we have here. And so we have that rootstock system, and then I'm going to take budwood, or a bud from another tree that I really like because maybe it tastes really good, it produces really good fruit, or maybe it has good disease resistance, or maybe it's whatever the reason I like this other tree. I'm then going to take a piece of budwood from that tree and graft it on top of the rootstock. And now I have this best of both worlds of the rootstock that's great for this soil. And then it's going to be actually growing out into this other variety that is either tastes really good, or for whatever reason, I've decided to hold on to that one type of variety. So that's a way to hold on to a tree that maybe this tree is starting to die back. Well, I can save some of it and put it onto a new tree. Or it's also going to produce fruit faster because that budwood is coming from a tree that might be 20 years old. It's producing fruit, but my rootstock is only 1 year old. Well, now I'm putting this 20-year-old rootstock onto this vigorous new root growth, and it's going to start producing fruit so much faster than if you just put a seed in the ground. And also a lot
So
of
it's like a life hack. It's like
Yeah, it
you get
literally-
20 years and it's like, that's
100%. Yeah. So
didn't know it
there's
worked
so
like
many
that.
different ways to graft. I'd love to show you what we have at Echo.
Yeah.
Anyone come see what we're doing. I think it's
For
literally
sure.
wild.
Yeah.
And so there's that. There's also air layering, which is, again, it's just that one is where you're gonna just push root growth on something, and that's a practice that people do sometimes when they're trying to prune a tree. And so
Okay.
you just choose the limbs that you're trying to prune anyways, and you just come up to that stem that you're trying to prune off, and you just peel back the bark, and you trick it into thinking that it's underground by putting moss around it, by taping it up, putting wet moss around it. And it's tricking those cells into thinking that it's underground, and it's going to start rooting out. So now you have it wrapped up in this moss and it's rooting out. And then maybe 3 months later, you can just come by, clip it off, and now you have a new tree that's just there, and you didn't have to
And
worry
that creates
about.
a new tree?
Yeah, and it's technically that same age as the old
No
tree, so it would
way.
still be able to fruit in the same way that the old one did.
And you know what? It's probably, if it's made it that long, it's probably been through some kind of attacks from pests, fungus, or diseases. And that probably is resistant to a lot of those because if it's the same stock. That is crazy. That's like mind blowing. It's so cool. That stuff is a lot of fun. People are like, yeah, just landscaping, just playing. It's
They're like, no, I'm out here blood, sweat, and tears trying to get this graft. I'm like, I'm out here grinding.
that is so
Yeah.
cool. And so, do you put moss around it and wet moss, and then does it stay wet, or how does it stay wet?
Yeah, so you're gonna wrap it up. You know, it kind of looks like a burrito. Think you're at Chipotle, just wrapping it
Yeah.
up in its little burrito, and then most of the time it shouldn't dry out. You're really wanting it to be tight. We'll tie it on the ends to really keep it up in there. If it's in a healthy environment, there's probably going to be rain, and you're really looking for the branches that are pointing upward, because you wouldn't want to air layer a branch that's pointing downward, because that's its growth habit. And when you
Okay.
plant it, it's going to like kind of lean towards that way. So we're looking for branches that are pointing upwards anyways. And so when there is rain, the rain would hypothetically
Continue.
be coming into that air
That is
layer
so
and
cool.
be creating just life. And
That is wild. So that's propagation. For what are some of the other main things that you do at Echo?
yeah, so you know when you work for a nonprofit and everybody kind of just ends up doing everything.
Literally
That's kinda-
everything. It's like a small business.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
almost
it's like,
I own. Yeah, no.
yes, exactly.
So I'm out here grinding a lot, but I love everything. It's really cool to do outreach. I think that's my favorite part. I really love getting to see other folks get excited about what they could do in their own communities. So we have 8 interns that come to Echo.
8 of them?
8 interns. They come, they live on campus, they're in charge of an area, they're getting a master's certificate in tropical agriculture. So they have classwork and they have their field work, their demonstration area that they're taking care of. So once a week, I'm teaching them. And we're still a production nursery. So I'm
still
producing.
Yeah.
I got all of my fruit. Like I'm out there doing that. I have me and my assistant and some incredible volunteers from the community that come and help us out twice a week. So whether I'm prepping for a training, whether I'm doing a training, whether I'm out there just pulling weeds because it's rainy season in Florida and we're struggling.
Yep, I hear that.
It's never a dull moment, but it's really things that really bring life, and it's really wonderful.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I think we definitely need to do another one to dive into some of the stuff we didn't touch on. But we will be shooting some videos probably in the next couple of weeks of some of this grafting stuff to show you guys some demonstrations. So that'll be incredibly fun. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a gift.
Sweet.
Thanks for listening in. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Brought to you with support from Fort Myers Garden Service, maintaining and protecting business and residential landscapes. Visit FortMyersGardenService.com or call 239-990-7494.